Okay, well, let us look at what is one of the top three most depressing chapters in the entire Bible. Certainly, one of the top three most depressing chapters in the Old Testament. If you're looking at darkest passages of Scripture in the Bible, I'm going to go just focusing on Hebrew Bible at this point, just Old Testament. Job chapter 3, Jeremiah chapter 20, and Psalm 88. Those are my three darkest passages of Scripture. Now, I think that Jeremiah is third. I don't know whether Psalm 88 or Job is first and second. Those two switch on me, and maybe we can figure that out a little bit tonight. I mean, the last word of Psalm 88 is darkness in Hebrew and in English. Literally, the psalm ends in darkness, and the psalmist doesn't even ask God to do anything. He just wanted to let God know that the psalmist knew that every bad thing that happened to him was God's fault. That's all he says. It was a whole psalm just devoted to, hey, God, I know you did this. That's it. This, you will recall, is a week of silence. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, Job's three friends, have showed up. They saw him and didn't recognize him. They were crying and mourning themselves because of the suffering that has happened on their good friend Job. And they sat in silence with him for a week. Someone's got to say something after a week. And it turns out it's Job that breaks the silence after a week. So after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Believe it or not, there's a lot just in the, I promise I'll pick the pace up, but I gotta I gotta look at that verse first. First of all, opened his mouth is more than just a poetic expression. Opened his mouth is a phrase that is used to denote, well, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it actually very often denotes some divine action. Usually, it's a mute that's been made able to speak. His mouth was opened, or his tongue was loosed. It is also used when an idol has been carved by a skilled idol maker. They have the opening of the mouth ceremony, and it's after that ceremony that the idol can then speak for the god. That before that, but the god opens the mouth of the idol. So opening the mouth is seen as a, if nothing else, a dramatic moment. This is not just a poetic moment. This is not just. I mean, it's not. And you know what? He said something. No, it's more than that. It is. This is a big statement he's making. This is a big speaking moment he's making. Also, he curses the day's birth. That word is actually the word curse. That is not the word barak that we've gotten earlier that can mean either blessing or curse. This one is curse. There's no question about it. Oh, the Egyptians had opening of the mouth for the deceased. Interesting. The Mesopotamians had the opening of the mouth ceremony for the idols, which is, I think, why all throughout the book of Ezekiel, the Lord opened my mouth is such a common expression for Ezekiel, because Ezekiel is portrayed as God, remember, treats Ezekiel the way that humans treated idols. God picks him up, moves him around, uses him as a puppet, and opens his mouth. So yeah, it's idols in Mesopotamia. The dead, interesting. Opening of the mouth of the dead. That might actually be more relevant for our Job story here than the Mesopotamia one. But he does curse the day's birth. There's no question. This is absolutely a curse. Also, the day of his birth. So this is, I want to point this out too. You are forbidden by Torah, later Torah, to curse God, and you are forbidden by Torah to curse your parents. In either of those cases, you would be killed. You'd be stoned to death for that. However, human beings being as they are, never underestimate our ability to get around the rules. And so, since you can't curse God and you can't curse your parents, you curse the day you were born. And that way you implicate both God and your parents, and you get around the rules, basically. It's really a very clever way of doing it. It obviously happens in Jeremiah 20, where he curses the day he was born, and here in Job it happens as well. So, you know what? I've never heard this suggested as the shortest verse in the Bible, but it only has 2 words too, and I think it's shorter than Jesus wept. There's only 7 letters here. Job said. That's even shorter than John 11:35.
Is it the same in Hebrew?
In Hebrew, it would be Ayov Ana, and that's significant because it's not the word for said. It's not the word for said here. I think it's interesting that verse 2 here, it's Job said is the way everybody translates it. Literally, it's Job answered. Yeah, there's no question, and no one has said anything to him at this point. But that is what it says in Hebrew. Job answered. So I think maybe
It's like after all of the stuff that's
exactly after 2 chapters.
Okay, no, I'm not. Now I get 5 minutes for the day.
Exactly, I got something to say, if you will. So, and then we get into the answer, and boy, what an answer it is. Job says, "Let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said a man child is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, or light shine on it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds settle upon it. Let blackness of the day terrify it. That night let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. Yes, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry be heard in it. Let those who curse it, who curse the sea, those who are skilled to rouse up Leviathan, let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for its light, but have none. May it not see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes." There's more to this chapter, but that first to verse 10 is good enough to talk about what we want to talk about. This is why I put Job as a more depressing chapter than Jeremiah. Jeremiah wishes he had never been born. Job wishes the day that his birthday was never actually occurred. And if you were this comes through a little bit in English, but it is way more obvious in Hebrew. The framing of these first verses of Job's response is invoking in a negative way Genesis 1. So in Genesis 1, let there be light, let that day be darkness is exactly the same construction.
This is the exact opposite.
It is. He's what's that? He is uncreating.
Leviathan, which, if I'm not mistaken, mentions chaos.
Exactly. Well, you know that because you have listened to me once before.
Yes, I've heard it many times.
Well, it's important, doggone it. People ignore this. As Thomas points out, by the way, some Bibles will have cursed days, and some people will have cursed seas. And that is a textual issue here, because the word for day is yom, and the word for sea is yam. And the only difference is the word for sea is 2 letters, and the word for day is 3 letters, and that middle letter is a vowel. So there's some question as to whether it's a scribal emendation. The question is, what's it in parallel with? The people who want to see it in parallel with the days will translate this as those who curse days. I think the NIV does that. The NRSV sees it in parallel with this word Leviathan. I think I've said this before in Wednesday Night Bible Study, but it's worth saying again. I have seen really bad readings of the Leviathan. Leviathan I actually saw a study Bible that listed it as crocodiles. I have had, it's just, Leviathan's a crocodile and Behemoth is a hippopotamus. Yeah, check that off. And our Bible interpretation's done. No, I've seen them that labeled them as dinosaurs or dragons. Actually, the Septuagint translates Leviathan dragon. I'll prefer that, frankly. Leviathan is neither of those things. I want to show you real quick in Hebrew what this looks like. In Hebrew, Leviathan looks like this. The Syrian or Aramaic god or Aramean god Lotan, god of chaos, Mediterranean god of chaos, is spelled like this. Now, even if you can't read Hebrew, I think you can probably see those 2 words are very close. Yes. And you could even leave this little letter out and you could still say it says Leviathan, frankly. It's very, very close. I believe Leviathan is the Hebraic appropriation or allusion to the Syrian or Aramean god of chaos. This is the Tiamat of the nearer to Israel, if you will. Remember Tiamat and Marduk in the creation story? We talked about that, the Babylonian creation story. Tiamat is the evil, watery chaos dragon that Marduk subdues and spreads the waters above from the waters below. Lotan is kind of that, only in Western Levant area. Everybody had that that creation story. And so the Bible was well aware of those. And so Leviathan is that kind of personification of chaos. Anytime you see the word Leviathan, think in terms of chaos dragon, as Thomas correctly pointed out, an allusion to uncreated. So what is happening here is we're invoking Genesis 1, that great creation story, only we're doing it in reverse. We're taking the side of chaos in this case. Let that day be darkness, not let there be light. The days of the year, the numbers of the months, you hear those echoes in Genesis 1 as well, where the stars are meant to number the days and the months. And then we want the people who are skilled to rouse up Leviathan. In other words, he is on the side of chaos. And this is why I say that Job is darker than Jeremiah. Jeremiah says, I wish I'd never been born. Job says, I wish nobody had been born. I hurt so bad, I wish creation would unmake itself. The level of suffering I have means that no one should ever have entered into this world. That is Job's position. It's more than that. It's that his life sucks so much that no one else. Yes, I am not arguing with Job. I am trying to give you the sense of Job's angst here. This is his trauma that he is enduring is at such a level. And for him, it's more than that. Remember, because his life, the whole first two chapters from Job's perspective don't make any sense. We have been told Job is blameless and upright, and Job has lost his children and his wealth and his health. And Job is saying, if this is what I am enduring, then the world, the universe needs to unmake itself, because no one should have to live in a world that is this unfair, that is this unjust. He continues on. Why did I not die at birth? Come forth from the womb and expire. Why were there knees to receive me, breasts for me to suck? Now I would be lying down in quiet. I'd be asleep. Then I'd be at rest with kings and counselors of the earth who rebuild ruins for themselves, or with princes who have gold or fill their houses with silver. I do think it's interesting that he almost has an Ecclesiastes quality to this, that these kings and these princes who've rebuilt ruins, in other words, there are ruins, they've rebuilt them, and the implication is, and now they're dead too. So these people who've spent all their effort to try to make a name for themselves in this world, nothing. Why was not buried like a stillborn child, like an infant that never sees the light? There the wicked cease from troubling. There the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. There they do not hear the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there. Everybody dies. Why don't I just, wouldn't that be better? And the slaves are free from their masters. Why is light given to one in misery, and life to the bitter in soul who long for death, but it does not come? And dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. Why is light given to one who can't see the way, whom God has fenced in? I love this wonderful reversal here, because remember, Hasatan's accusation to God is, have you not put a hedge around him to protect him? And Job is now saying, God has fenced me in as a result of this. And that, the world, he's like limited his existence to the point that he makes no sense. So I love this sort of reversal of that image of protection is now an image of violation. My sighing comes like my bread. My groanings are poured out like water. Truly, the thing I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I'm not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. I should also point out we're only one chapter away, and God is at fault here. There's no, like I said, Hasatan is out of the story. Now, I don't think that it is a stretch to call this a lament. I feel like I'm on pretty good footing here, except it does not have the qualities you would expect from a lament. There are 5 qualities we've talked about before that you have for a lament cry out, lament psalm, for example. There is always the invocation, O God, O Lord. You will notice Job 3 is not addressed to anyone. It is simply a monologue, if you will. We got plenty of complaint in Job 3, and we have plenty of petition. Why can't I die? Why can't I just go? There is no doxology, but I know God, the God, the everlasting, the one from forever. No, we don't have that. And we don't have any affirmation of trust, at least not in Job
Well,
3.
that's not shocking.
No, I wouldn't think so. We're pretty early in there's 42 chapters. We don't jump to the end, right? But no affirmation of trust. So it only has these two bits, but I'm convinced it is in fact a lament. I have no problem with that. And one of the reasons I can say that is because I do have a doctorate, but there's a reason I can say that. As with my doctorate, I can say Psalm 88 only has these two bits. So, and it's certainly a lament as well. So you don't have to have all of those. It's kind of like what makes a country song. You can think about all the elements that makes a country song. You don't have to have all of those elements unless you're trying to write. Was it David Allan Coe's? What was it? You never even call me by my name. You don't have to call me by my name. Anyone remember that song? You don't even call me by my name. Where he added a last verse that tried to include, the I was drunk the day my mom got out of prison. Yeah. So, tried to add all these elements he didn't have to make it a country song. It's really pretty clever. You don't need to do that as long as you have enough. Laments are prayers. Certainly Jeremiah's is. And the Psalms are songs, but they are usually thought of as prayers. Praying the Psalms is something that has been done from an ancient period of time. As I said, the only thing that gives me pause on calling it a prayer, Bob, is to whom? This is simply spoken out. This is, someone called it and I can't remember who was, maybe Hegel, who called it a lament monologue as opposed to a lament psalm or a lament prayer. This is a lament monologue. Job had some thoughts and he thought he would express them to no one in particular, just going to go ahead and do his dramatic expression of feelings here. So there's no invocation. So I don't know that I call it a prayer exactly, except asking for the people who are on the side of chaos to rouse up chaos. That's really the only petition he makes toward outside directly to someone. Let those who can stir up days or the sea, who can rouse Leviathan. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think it's a prayer, but it's certainly a lament. There are a number of problematic, dare we say, heretical positions that Job takes in Job chapter 3. I mean, first of all, wishing that creation would unmake itself is certainly that sets you against God, who is the one who ordered creation. And to openly declare allegiance to Leviathan, or wanting Leviathan, wanting chaos, Leviathan is sort of personified as the antithesis of God. It is, Leviathan is the chaos against God's good order, and he is now he wants to rouse up that chaos. That's a problem too. Mm-hmm. Are laments a part of modern worship services? Not nearly enough, but they're growing. They are parts of some memorial services. Anyone that you do is going to have a lament in it. But frankly, the church has historically been very uncomfortable. American church has been very uncomfortable with lament. And there's a great article written by Walter Brueggemann called The Costly Loss of Lament, in which he laments, if you will, what he calls the sanitation of worship, the sanitizing of worship, where we remove any of the sad stuff, ignoring completely that the hymn book of ancient Israel had over half of their songs as laments. He says that, the worship of the Bible, unlike our worship too often, is real and recognizes that life is hard and that there aren't always answers. And that when you don't have answers, the appropriate response is to take those concerns directly to the divine. And that is a worshipful experience as well. And Cindy and I think everywhere we have gone, have tried to bring more lament. And our probably the closest we've come is the last All Saints Day service was a lament service that we did this past November. That was not a special lament service. Certainly, the service of consolation that we have had in December Some churches like to call it Blue Christmas. I've never liked to call it Blue Christmas. That just
That's too Elvis.
it is a little too Elvisy for me. And so service of consolations can be lament. I tried to have a lament service once in when I was an interim. Actually, I wasn't an interim at this church. I was just asked to preach at this church, and I was very good. I was good friends with the pastor, and he said he was doing a series on the Psalms, and he said, if you could preach any psalm, what would you do? I said, I'd preach Psalm 88, and he said, what would you? I said, if you really want to know what I would like to do with Psalm 88, I'd like to actually see a lament service, not a lament service where we pretend it's not a lament service and we undo it all at the end, but everybody lived happily ever after. And he was like, okay, okay, okay. He was brave, and we did it. And then we had some testimonies, some pre-taped testimonies, and they were hard. A recent cancer diagnosis, someone who'd been abused growing up, someone who was going through a divorce, just expressed their questions and they weren't sure what to do, and they trust in God, but they just haven't found any answers. And so, that was one service out of 52. The Bible has over half of theirs as lament. So I'm seeing more comfort with lament as people are starting to. I think that millennials, Gen Z in particular, authenticity in worship is so important. Authentic faith is important, and lament is authentic. And so I'm seeing that more and more. But Psalms, let's say Psalms first and foremost. That's the worship book of Israel. That everything can be worship is the point of the biblical text. Everything can be prayer. That sad is prayer, sad is worship, happy is prayer, and happy is worship. And anger is prayer, and anger is worship, and frustration and joy. I mean, the whole authentic relationship, the range of human relationship emotions that are found in a relationship are worship. And I've said many times that within the Hebrew word for prayer, I see a parable. That Hebrew word for prayer is always reflexive. In other words, David prays himself to God, Joshua prays himself to God, Moses prays himself to God. I've always seen that as a parable for what prayer is, and that is the taking of ourselves to God. And if where we are is joy, then we take that to God. If where we are is lament, we take that to God. And if we take something that doesn't reflect where we are, we have a word for that too. That's called hypocrisy. So as I said, Job, Eliphaz didn't like Job being sad either. But actually, what he really didn't like was what he saw as dangerous theology. Job is unorthodox in Job chapter 3. Cheering on chaos is not good. Wishing that creation would unmake itself, not good. And wishing the calendar wasn't around, undoing Genesis 1. I mean, all of that bad idea to not be on God's side. So Eliphaz, Job has started speaking. Eliphaz decides to respond. And what we get now is cycles of speeches. We get Job who speaks, a friend speaks, Job responds, a friend speaks, Job responds, friend speaks, Job responds. And that happens now for the next 28 chapters. Okay. At first, it seems like they're talking to each other. They actually seem to be listening. By the time you get to the chapter 28, 29, 30, nobody's listening to anybody anymore. They're just talking past each other. At least they kind of seem to be engaged with what each other were saying this early on. So yes, I mean there's multi-purpose here. They defend God. I mean, Job is attacking God. They're defending God, and they're trying to make sure their friend, who they've admired and honored and looked up to, frankly, right, the greatest of all the men of the East, is not losing his faith. They don't let. Okay, all right. I think doubt is one thing. I think if Job had said, "Boy, I just don't know what to make of this," that's one thing. I think Job actively campaigning for the enemies of God is a whole different matter. Okay, so well, one handicap we have here, we do not place as much weight on what people say as they would. A spoken word for them is a contract, especially if you invoke the divine. That is ours is always, well, did you sign anything? Right? Right. But for them, the minute you have spoken it, it's an oath. Each friend has their own perspective when they're bringing their concerns. They all have the same underlying theological point, which we're going to maybe see in a second, maybe not. They all have the same underlying theological point, but they all have their own shade on it a little bit. So it's not quite like they're building on it. And it's kind of, I mean, I'm not going to be one who wants to argue that they are, some sort of typology representing. Eliphaz is the mystic. All right. He's the one to whom God speaks in spirits in the middle of the night. Others have, they don't speak to authority figures. They simply seem to be speaking of, what I've seen, the way I've looked at life, this is what happens. And frankly, that kind of idea. So more of an anecdotal way. So they all have their own, it's a lot of speech here. This is just 2 chapters in Eliphaz's first speech, but they all have their own ideas. And what's really brilliant about the book of Job is the friends make really good points. You almost wish you could dismiss them like we want to, right? They're just like, oh, these idiots, they're not supporting Job. He's having a hard, but what they say makes such sense sometimes. Okay, sometimes, like we'll see, we'll get to Zophar next week. Zophar gets the award in my mind for worst pastoral care in the entire Bible. He's terrible. But Eliphaz, and they make some good points sometimes. So, like, for example, he even gently gets into the story. He says, if one ventures a word with you, will you be offended? But who can keep from speaking, right? Because he's now been challenged, if you will, he's challenging God's position. See, you have instructed many. You have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have supported those who were stumbling. You have made firm feeble knees. But now it has come to you and you're impatient. It touches you and you're dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? So he opens with, you have done a lot of good with your faith for people. Your belief, your teaching has lifted people up. Now that you're the one facing trauma, don't give up now. Let your trust in God be your confidence. Let your integrity be your hope. That seems to make some sense on some level, right? You've done this before. You have helped so many people. You should put that trust in that. Then he continues, think now, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? You just can't think of anybody who's innocent that's ever perished. Anywhere, right? The way we've seen life, as I have seen it, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. The bad guys get what's coming to them. The good guys get rewarded, right? That's just the way the world works. Everyone knows that. Okay, they don't always make good sense. Okay, sometimes they make good sense.
But strong start, disappointing follow.
So yeah, it gets a little worse. By the breath of God they perish. By the blast of his anger they're consumed. And now we get to his mystical qualities here. A word came stealing to me, and my ear received the whisper of it amid thoughts from visions of the night when deep sleep falls. When you're about to fall asleep and you get those great ideas. Thomas actually keeps a notepad right by his bed for when those great ideas strike. Well, the fact that you keep the notepad there is a good thing, so that you can. Eliphaz has the same issue. Just as when deep sleep falls on mortals, he keeps a papyrus right next to his bed to write these thoughts down. Dread came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones shake. A spirit glided past my face. The hair of my flesh bristled. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice. Oh, wow. Can mortals be righteous before God? Can human beings be pure before their Maker? Can they? Can mortals be righteous before God? Can mortals be righteous before God? Can human beings be pure before their Maker? This is the genius of the book of Job. We want to agree with the friends. They make a lot. Can mortals be righteous before God? Well, no, of course not. They can't be. So Job claiming that he's righteous and protesting his innocence. Obviously, this is a bad idea. Because a human being can't do that. Really
compelling arguments.
It really is. And see, as I say, we want to agree with the friends and we want to disagree with Job often. And that's a real problem when we get to the end of the book. Trust me on that. Call now. Is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Right? Go ahead and look for some other team. Go ahead and stop listening to Yahweh. Who are you going to call? Not if not Yahweh on this. Surely vexation. Not Ghostbusters, no. Surely vexation kills the fool, jealousy slays the simple. I've seen fools taking root, but suddenly I curse their dwelling. Their children are far from safety. They're crushed in the gate. There's no one to deliver them. The hungry eat their harvest, and they even have to take it out of thorns. And the thirsty pant after their wealth. For misery does not come from the earth, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. But human beings are born to trouble, just as sparks fly upward. People get what they deserve. And even if it looks like they don't, sooner or later they will. They'll get what they deserve. Because that's just how the world works, right?
Obviously, yeah.
As for me, now this is just me. I mean, I know you're suffering, Joe, but I mean, if I were in your shoes, what I would do, I would seek God. And to God I would commit my cause. He does great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. Does God do great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number? Well, yeah, he does. He gives rain on the earth, sends waters on the field, sets on high those who are lowly. To those who mourn are lifted to safety. He frustrates the devices of the crafty so that their hands achieve no success. He takes the wise in their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. Happy is the one whom God reproves. Therefore, do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. Don't despise the discipline of the Almighty. So really, yes, God is doing this to you, but you're just being disciplined. And we know that God lifts up those. So we got a lot of positions we're taking here. Bad things come to the people who deserve the bad things, and God disciplines people when they deserve bad things. And, Eliphaz says, if it was me, I would not turn against God. I'd accept the discipline of God. For he wounds, but he binds up. He strikes, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles, and in 7 no harm shall touch you. In famine he'll redeem you from death, and in war from the power of the sword. You shall be hidden from the scourge of the tongue, shall not fear the destruction when it comes, and destruction and famine you shall laugh, and shall not fear the wild animals of the earth. Yeah, he's not as explicit as the other friends, but he absolutely is. You absolutely deserve to watch everyone you love die, right? As I have seen things, Eliphaz says, bad people get what's coming to them. God is righteous. No mortal can stand before the God. No mortal can claim to be sinless and righteous, even though we know from reading the prologue that Job is in fact blameless, and that they're this is why I think this is one of those reasons, this is why it's so important to have the prologue, because we know that Job doesn't deserve this. So we know there's no tie between Job's behavior and what is happening on Job. And so Eliphaz is wrong. At the end of the story? Well, Bob is going to jump to the end of the story on this. Yes. Job is restored, and he even gets replacement children, which we'll talk about. You don't get the same kids. You get new kids. And the daughters were beautiful. So apparently the first daughters were not, because the second ones are mentioned. But you're exactly right. I mean, Bob, this is one of the things that people bring up, is that as much as people want to read the book of Job as a challenge to Deuteronomic theology, at the end, Deuteronomic theology wins. In other words, Job is obedient, and eventually he's restored. But it's quite a journey from Job chapter 3 to Job chapter 42. And I think by the time we get there, I can make the case. By the time we get to Job 42, the journey is, we're going to find out that I don't think it works. I don't think that this is what happened to Job, frankly. Yes, Job gets his possessions back, but he is not restored because he was disciplined for his sin. The reason he's restored is a matter of some debate. So once he's saying not to abandon God, for you shall be in league with the stones of the field. The wild animals shall be at peace with you. You shall know that your tent is safe. You shall inspect your fold. God is going to restore you in all of this. And then he says, verse 27, see, we have searched this out. It's true. Hear and know it yourself.
Well, obviously, this is
Trust me, we've researched this. And bad folks get what's coming to them, and good folks get restored. So hang in there. Go ahead and accept your discipline from God. We've tested this. Turns out it's right. He does. Well, I could slip into televangelist voice if I needed to.
No,
No, I don't have to. Friends. No, we don't do that. So That's Eliphaz's point. Wait till you see Job's response. It's a good one.